My name is Sumaya. I am 28 years old, but for most of my life, I lived as if I belonged to someone else. I was born into golden chains, a Saudi princess whose every breath, step, and word was monitored. The Al-Saud Palace, where I grew up, was more than a home. It was a fortress of tradition, of surveillance, of unyielding religious expectation. Walls that gleamed with marble-hid corridors lined with the ever-watchful eyes of servants, guards, and imams. Freedom was a word I had never known. As the third daughter in line for the regional throne, my life was predetermined. My father, the governor of 3 provinces, wielded power with the subtlety of silk over iron. He could sentence a man to death before breakfast and negotiate oil deals before lunch. My mother was a scholar of the Quran and had memorized thousands of hadith. She wielded her knowledge like a weapon, a silent enforcer of obedience and fear. Together, they shaped a home that resembled a palace of worship as much as a prison. From the age I could speak, devotion to Islam was the center of my existence. I awoke at 4:30 a.m. for Fajr prayers, spent hours memorizing the Quran, and studied Islamic jurisprudence with a discipline that left little space for childhood or curiosity. By 11, I had memorized all 6,236 verses of the Quran. The imams called me a prodigy, my parents called me their pride. I called it survival. There was a hollow victory in being praised for perfection that never felt like my own. Fridays were the worst. I led prayer circles for the women of our extended family. Dozens of wives, daughters, and servants gathered to hear me recite verses about obedience, submission, and the fire of hell awaiting the wayward. They looked at me with awe, thinking I was close to God. But inside, the echo of emptiness was deafening. Marble halls and gold-plated fixtures surrounded me, yet the richness of my life felt barren. I obeyed, I memorized, I smiled, but my heart remained untouched. The palace had 127 rooms, most of which I had explored by my 20th year. Yet one section remained forbidden in my mind, the East Wing, an old library abandoned since my grandfather's time. Its closed doors whispered of secrets and forbidden knowledge. I did not know then that behind those doors, my life would change forever. For all my obedience, all my devotion, all my memorization, my soul remained imprisoned. And the fire that would later consume me was not only outside, it had been simmering quietly inside me for years, waiting to ignite. It was during Ramadan, in the quiet hours before dawn, when curiosity first pulled me toward the east wing of the palace. The household was asleep, the corridors hushed, the silence punctuated only by the distant murmur of the guards' footsteps. For years, I had avoided that wing. It felt forbidden, as if even the air there carried secrets too dangerous for a princess to touch. But that night, something inside me, a restless hunger I could no longer ignore, led my steps down the long, dim hallway. The door to the library groaned as I pushed it open, a sound that seemed too loud for the stillness around me. Dust motes danced in the faint shaft of moonlight spilling through the high windows. The air smelled of aged paper, leather, and a quiet history that had been forgotten. Row upon row of books lined the walls, some in Arabic, some in French and English, others in languages I could not recognize. Most were academic texts, volumes my grandfather had collected in London decades ago, history, politics, philosophy, economics. They were dry, impersonal, yet I ran my fingers along the spines as if I could absorb their wisdom by touch. Then I saw it, a section of the bookshelf that didn't seem to belong. Its wood grain was slightly off, the paneling subtle but distinct. I pressed it, almost on impulse, and it clicked open to reveal a small hidden compartment. Inside were 3 books. 2 were in French, but the third was a black leather Bible in English. My heart nearly stopped. To possess a Bible in Saudi Arabia was a crime punishable by death. And yet, here it was, hidden in my family's own library. The weight of that discovery pressed on me, a mix of fear and fascination that I had never felt before. I should have closed the compartment and left, alerted the household, perhaps even reported it. But something told me this book was meant for me. I took it back to my room and hid it under my mattress. For 3 nights, I did not open it. My mind churned with questions, warnings, and guilt. And then, on the 4th night, curiosity overcame fear. I waited until every corridor was silent, every guard asleep, and opened the Bible by the dim light of my phone. What I found inside shocked me. I expected attacks on Islam, distortions, perhaps even blasphemy. Instead, I read about a man named Jesus, who spoke of love, mercy, and forgiveness in a way that contrasted sharply with every fear-driven lesson I had memorized. He healed the sick, welcomed outcasts, defended the helpless. His words touched a part of my heart I didn't know existed. I began to read more each night. John, Matthew, Luke, they became companions in the darkness of the palace. The fear never left, but alongside it grew a strange peace. A light I had never known flickered in my soul. For the first time, I wondered if obedience to God might not only demand ritual and law, but also love. The hidden library had given me a secret far more dangerous than the palace walls could contain. And it was a secret that would soon cost me everything. Night after night, I returned to that hidden Bible, and each word seemed to seep into the cracks of my heart where fear and emptiness had lived for so long. I read of Jesus calling fishermen to leave their nets, of his compassion for lepers, of his defense of a woman accused of adultery. Each story felt alive, as though he was speaking directly to me, whispering to the part of my soul that had been silenced for decades. I had been trained to fear, to obey, to memorize, but never to feel. Now, I was learning something new, the possibility of love that demanded nothing in return, mercy that outweighed judgment, and a freedom so complete it terrified me. The contrast was staggering. My prayers to Allah, repeated every day in ritual, filled me with a cold sense of duty. But when I whispered to Jesus, it was different. Peace. Courage. Life. The transformation began subtly. I asked different questions during family discussions. When Father spoke of punishment for apostates, I asked why mercy was not considered first. When Mother described eternal damnation for those who strayed from Islam, I wondered aloud whether love could be greater than wrath. My questions were polite, careful, yet they caused ripples. The household noticed. I noticed. I was no longer merely reciting words. I was thinking, feeling, and understanding in ways that were forbidden. And then came the quiet changes in my behavior. I became aware of the servants' lives beyond my own luxurious walls. I asked about their families, their struggles, their dreams. I began giving away small treasures, jewelry, coins, hidden gifts, to those in need, acts that were unnoticed by most but impossible to hide from eyes always watching. My heart expanded in ways I had never imagined. Compassion replaced obedience, curiosity replaced fear. Still, fear lingered. The imams, my family, the religious advisors, they would notice eventually. And yet, the more I read, the stronger my longing grew. I prayed to Jesus, asking him to confirm his reality, asking for guidance, asking for courage. And though my lips formed words only in secret, a warmth settled deep in my chest, a certainty that I had never felt in all my years of ritual devotion. It was exhilarating and terrifying all at once. For the first time, I felt alive in a way that had nothing to do with the privileges of my birth. A quiet rebellion had begun, not against my family, not against my culture, but against the prison of fear and emptiness that had defined my life. The more I surrendered to this new understanding, the more my soul burned with a desire for truth, for love, for life. Yet, the most dangerous truth of all was dawning. To follow this path openly would destroy everything I had ever known. My title, my inheritance, my family, my very life, everything hung in the balance. And still, I could not stop. The fire that had begun quietly in my heart was growing, and soon it would demand everything. The first signs of suspicion were subtle, almost imperceptible. A glance held too long, a question answered with hesitation, a servant avoiding my eyes. At first, I dismissed these moments, blaming my imagination. But as days passed, the tension became undeniable. The palace that had once seemed merely oppressive now felt like a cage under constant watch. Every small shift in my heart, every quiet prayer to Jesus, was being felt by others. My younger brother began to regard me differently. His once friendly smiles became cautious, his questions sharp with curiosity. The household imam, who had praised my memorization as a child, started observing me with the intensity of a judge. My own mother's demeanor shifted subtly, her calm, scholarly composure seemed to mask a simmering wariness. Even the servants, some of whom had known me for years, began to avoid me, their loyalty now torn between me and the whispers of the palace's inner corridors. I could not stop myself. My prayers grew longer, my thoughts more audacious. I began to ask questions during family discussions about mercy, love, and the true nature of God. My inquiries were careful, polite, but daring. When Father spoke of the punishment for apostates, I asked quietly if it was possible that God's mercy could surpass his wrath. When Mother cited verses on eternal damnation, I wondered aloud if love might be stronger than fear. The words were small, but in the palace, they were explosives. And then there were the actions. I could no longer ignore the hidden suffering of the household staff. The cleaning women, often exhausted and underpaid, began receiving my quiet gestures of care, small gifts of money, secretly delivered meals, whispered encouragement. When a servant broke a valuable item, instead of reporting it, I would quietly replace it without drawing attention. My heart felt lighter, freer, but the danger was growing heavier. The most treacherous change was internal. The part of me that had been molded by fear and tradition, the obedient daughter who recited the Quran flawlessly, was being replaced. In its place, a new voice whispered, asking, wondering, questioning, and seeking truth beyond the gilded walls. Each night, I prayed not to Allah but to Jesus, asking him to guide me, to reveal the path that was right and true. The risk of discovery loomed constantly, but the pull of this newfound love, this peace that outshone fear, was irresistible. By the end of those weeks, it was clear, the palace itself had turned against me. Every glance, every footstep, every whisper carried the weight of judgment. The seemingly endless corridors, that had once been my home now felt like the narrowing path of a trap. I could feel the walls closing in, not because of my father's anger alone, but because the fire within me was visible to all who watched closely. And yet, despite the danger, despite the fear that gnawed at my chest, I could not stop. My heart had been awakened. My soul had begun to breathe. And I knew, with a certainty that terrified me, that nothing could extinguish this spark, not even the wrath of my own family. Secrets have a way of revealing themselves, no matter how carefully we try to hide them. Mine came in the form of Fatima, my personal servant of 3 years. I had trusted her completely. She had helped dress me each morning, carried my meals, and listened patiently to my whispered prayers and quiet fears. I had thought our bond unbreakable, forged through years of service and intimacy. But loyalty to my uncle, to the religious authority in our home, proved stronger than years of shared confidences. It happened on the night of September 5, 2017. I was kneeling on my prayer rug, Bible open in my hands, praying to Jesus with a desperation that made every heartbeat feel like it might explode. The palace was silent. The guards were asleep, the corridors empty, the world seemingly paused to hold its breath. And then I heard the softest footstep behind my door. I turned, heart pounding, and there she stood. Fatima, face pale, eyes wide, not with fear or compassion, but with a cold satisfaction that made my stomach twist. She had seen everything, and she now held the power to destroy me with a single word. For a moment, the betrayal cut deeper than any physical wound could. Fatima had listened to my doubts, had cried with me when my heart ached, had even laughed softly at my whispered jokes. And now, she would use every moment of intimacy against me. She did not speak. She did not scold. She simply backed away, retreating into the shadows, every movement deliberate, calculated. I knew instantly where she was going, to tell Uncle Abdul Rahman, the man who controlled the spiritual truth of our household. My window of time had shrunk to mere minutes. I had perhaps 30 minutes before my fate would be sealed. 30 minutes to pray, to seek courage, to prepare my heart for the confrontation I could no longer avoid. I clutched the Bible to my chest, feeling the familiar warmth of its pages, and whispered prayers to Jesus, begging for strength, asking for peace, asking for protection against the storm I knew was coming. Within the hour, the storm erupted. Father's voice echoed through the palace, a roar of fury I had never heard before, shaking the marble corridors. Guards stormed to my room, the door crashing open, and I did not hide. I held the Bible in my hands like a shield and spoke the truth I had come to believe. That I had discovered Jesus, that I had prayed to him, and that I could no longer follow the path my family demanded. The rage that followed was instantaneous, violent, and cold. My father, mother, uncle, and the household guards descended upon me, their eyes burning with a mixture of betrayal, fear, and anger. The sanctuary of my room had vanished. The world I had known, the walls, the corridors, the familiar faces, had become a trap. That night, I realized that faith is never more alive than when it faces death. And that betrayal, no matter how painful, can be the spark that ignites a courage you never knew you had. I prayed harder than ever, clinging to the only promise I could trust, that Jesus would never abandon me, even in the darkest hour. The dawn of September 6th arrived heavy with dread. I had spent the night in a cold, stone chamber I had never known existed, far below the palace halls, a single barred window casting a sliver of light across the floor. Guards took turns watching me, their eyes full of disgust and suspicion. My Bible had been confiscated, hidden from view, but the knowledge of my faith burned brighter in my heart than ever. I prayed silently, holding to the promise that Jesus would be with me, even here. By morning, I was brought before the palace assembly, a courtroom of opulence transformed into a tribunal. The main hall, where I had attended weddings, celebrations, and state functions, now felt like a cage of judgment. 3 regional Islamic clerics, my father's closest advisors, and Uncle Abdul Rahman, the ultimate arbiter of spiritual truth in our household, were assembled. Members of the extended royal family, all appointed witnesses, filled the hall. Their gazes were heavy, calculating, expectant. The chief cleric, an ancient man with a beard as white as desert sand, read the charges with ceremonial gravity. Apostasy from Islam. Blasphemy against Allah and His Prophet. Corruption of royal bloodline through foreign religious influence. Potential contamination of other women in the family. Each accusation landed like a hammer on my chest, but I stood steady, gripping the folds of my robes, praying that my voice would not falter. Uncle Abdul Rahman presented the evidence with meticulous precision. Fatima testified to seeing me with the Bible, to my whispered prayers to Jesus. Guards recounted my unusual questions during family discussions, my acts of compassion toward servants, my subtle deviations from the rituals I had performed flawlessly for years. Even the household imam confirmed that my devotion had seemed hollow, unnatural, no longer aligned with our faith. When asked for my defense, I knew the words I spoke could not save me. I could lie, deny, recant, but that would mean denying the truth I had found, the life that now pulsed within me. I spoke with calm resolve, that Jesus Christ had revealed himself to me, that his love surpassed any fear I had ever known, that I could not, and would not, return to a faith that filled my soul with terror rather than peace. The hall erupted. Shouts, gasps, and cries of outrage filled the space. My father pleaded, his face lined with anguish, begging me to recant, to preserve both my life and the family's honor. Tears streamed down his weathered face. I wanted to save him from this shame, to return to the life I had known. But my heart would not yield. "Father," I said, voice breaking with emotion, "I love you, but I cannot deny Jesus Christ. He is the truth, and I will not trade eternal life for temporary safety." The verdict was unanimous. Death by public burning, a warning to all who might stray from the path of orthodoxy. My life, my name, my existence, all condemned. Yet, even in the face of such certainty, a calm settled within me. I had chosen faith over fear, truth over comfort, and nothing could undo the awakening that had begun in the quiet of that hidden library. The morning of September 7th dawned clear and merciless. From the small barred window of my cell, I could see the preparations in the palace courtyard. A wooden stake had been erected in the center, surrounded by bundles of oil-soaked wood. The sight of the pyre sent a shiver of terror through me. Every instinct screamed to flee, to hide, to survive. But my heart, for the first time, was anchored in something far stronger than fear. The guards came to collect me, their faces stone cold. They had stripped away all jewelry and personal items, leaving only the clothes I had chosen to wear. I refused the white shroud meant to signify a repentant Muslim. If I was to die, it would be as myself, a daughter of God in whom Jesus had planted eternal life. I held my head high as they led me through the corridors, past rooms filled with memories of my gilded prison, my childhood playrooms, the grand halls where I had memorized the Quran, the spaces where dreams had been measured against tradition and duty. All of it was about to burn behind me, yet within me, a freedom surged that I had never known. The courtyard was packed. Hundreds of witnesses, family and officials alike, watched as I approached the stake. Father's face twisted with grief and rage, mother's eyes averted in despair, Uncle Abdul Rahman's expression was rigid with judgment. The religious officials began chanting prayers, invoking the wrath of God upon apostates, their voices echoing across the marble space. As they tied my wrists and ankles, the rough rope cutting into my skin, I whispered a single prayer to Jesus. The gasoline-soaked wood crackled beneath my feet, and the chief cleric raised his torch, leaning close to light the pyre. Flames licked the edges of the wood. Heat scorched my senses. Pain erupted instantly as fire climbed, consuming everything it touched. I screamed, not to Allah, not to my family, but to Jesus. "Jesus, save me." My voice was desperate, raw, filled with every ounce of faith I had mustered. And then, impossibly, the world changed. A light brighter than the noon sun erupted around me. Warm, gentle, yet overwhelming. Through the brilliance, I saw him, Jesus Christ, marked with nail scars, radiating love and power. His hands reached toward me. The flames died instantly. The ropes fell away. My clothes were untouched, my body unburned. I stood free in the center of the courtyard, the impossibility of it overwhelming the witnesses. Guards fell to their knees, clerics stumbled back in terror, and Father collapsed, staring at me with eyes that could not comprehend what they saw. The impossible had become real. Jesus had pulled me from the flames with his own hands. Then his voice, clear and gentle, spoke directly to my spirit. "Run now, my daughter. Your work here is finished, but your true ministry is about to begin." I did not question. I began walking, each step steady, the crowd parting before me. For the first time in my life, fear had no power. Only freedom, only life, only the love that had saved me from death itself. The chaos in the courtyard seemed endless, yet I moved through it with a calm that defied everything I had ever known. Jesus' command echoed in my spirit, "Run now, my daughter." And run I did. Each step carried the weight of years of fear and oppression, yet felt lighter than air. Guards, officials, even my own father, who moments ago had been consumed with fury, could not touch me. The miracle had rendered every human attempt powerless. At the gates of the palace, 3 figures awaited, servants I had never noticed before. Their simple brown robes contrasted sharply with the ornate grandeur of the palace. One, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, smiled at me knowingly. The other 2 were men, quiet and efficient, opening a small truck and motioning for me to climb inside. "Princess Sumaya," the woman said softly, "we are here to help you reach safety. Jesus sent us." I did not question. I climbed into the truck, my body still trembling from the miracle I had just experienced. The journey began in silence, the desert stretching endlessly on either side. Hours passed, but the fear of pursuit never left me. Still, with every mile, the terror that had once held me captive began to dissolve, replaced by a sense of awe, gratitude, and unwavering faith. They fed me, gave me water, and covered me with fresh clothes. But beyond the physical care, they shared stories of survival and divine intervention. Sa'ah, the woman who had spoken to me at the gates, recounted her own narrow escape from Damascus, where she had been stoned for her faith and survived. The men spoke of fleeing prisons in Iraq, of doors mysteriously opening and guards turning a blind eye. Each tale strengthened my belief that I was not alone, that God's hand had been at work far beyond the walls of my palace. The truck navigated hidden backroads, avoiding checkpoints and prying eyes. 18 hours later, we reached the Jordanian border at sunset. My pulse quickened at the sight of foreign soil. The border guards examined our documents, yet waved us through without hesitation, as though the miracle that had occurred in the palace had extended its protection to every obstacle. On the other side, the welcoming arms of an underground Christian network awaited. In a modest safe house in Amman, I met David, an American missionary, who had been praying for my safety for months. When he saw me alive and unharmed, he wept openly, overwhelmed by the proof of God's power. That evening, I understood something fundamental: my life was no longer my own. It had been placed into God's hands, and the path before me would be one of purpose, service, and unwavering faith. The escape was not just a flight from danger, it was a rebirth. The princess, who had lived in chains of tradition and fear, had been replaced by a daughter of God, free to walk in faith, to share her story, and to begin the work she had been saved to do. The first days in Amman were a blur of awe, relief, and cautious hope. I was no longer Princess Sumaya of Saudi Arabia. Titles, privileges, and the golden chains of my past had been stripped away in the fire, leaving only my body, my spirit, and a heart forever changed. The safe house was modest, nothing like the opulent palace I had fled, yet within its walls, I felt a freedom I had never known. For the first time, I could breathe without fear, pray without secrecy, and speak without monitoring eyes. David, the American missionary, who had been coordinating my rescue, became a guide and mentor. He introduced me to a network of believers, former refugees, ex-Muslims, and persecuted Christians, who had all experienced God's miraculous intervention in the face of impossible circumstances. Their stories resonated with my own. Each testimony of survival and divine provision strengthened my faith and affirmed the path I had chosen. Baptism was the first outward step of my new life. As I submerged beneath the water in that small church, I felt the weight of fear, doubt, and oppression leave my body. When I emerged, I was reborn, not as royalty, not as a fugitive, but as a child of God. Tears streamed freely, mixing with laughter, joy, and the overwhelming sense that God had not only saved me physically, but had given me a mission. Within weeks, I began sharing my story, first in small gatherings, then with larger groups as word spread. People listened, some in disbelief, some with tears, all captivated by the miracle of God's intervention. Through these early gatherings, I realized that my purpose was not only to recount my survival, but to encourage those still trapped in fear, oppression, and spiritual blindness. The ministry grew quickly. Support networks, Bible distributions, and discipleship programs became the framework of what would eventually expand into an international mission. I connected with Saudi Christians who worshipped in secret, providing them with encouragement, materials, and safe communication channels. Thousands of believers across the kingdom faced daily threats for their faith, and each story I heard reinforced the urgency of our work. Even as my new life flourished, the pain of separation from my family remained. Letters were rare, and most communication impossible. My father had declared me legally dead. Mother sent only condemnation through underground channels. Yet, through this grief, I learned to lean fully on God, trusting that His plans were greater than any human sorrow or loss. Every morning, I rose early to study the Bible and pray, the same way I had studied the Quran for years, but now with joy instead of fear. Each verse, each prayer, deepened my intimacy with Jesus, preparing me to face challenges, spread His word, and shepherd others who were walking paths of persecution and danger. In that small Amman safe house, the seed of a global ministry was planted. And with each passing day, I understood more deeply that my life, my pain, and my miraculous rescue were never just for me, they were for the countless others who would one day see God's power revealed in the impossible. As months turned into years, my life in Amman transformed from one of survival to a mission that stretched far beyond the confines of a single safe house. What began as small gatherings of refugees and persecuted believers grew into a network that spanned the Middle East, reaching into Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and even beyond. I became the regional coordinator for the International Christian Mission Organization, tasked with supporting secret churches in Saudi Arabia and neighboring countries where faith could cost a life. Every day was a balance between the miraculous and the dangerous. Communication with underground believers required encrypted messages, covert travel, and absolute vigilance. I could not visit Saudi Arabia, yet through trusted intermediaries, I distributed Bibles, Christian literature, and financial support to those risking everything to worship in secrecy. Each letter I received from someone who had encountered Jesus through our ministry strengthened me in ways nothing else could. Stories poured in, families hiding from authorities, women secretly leading Bible studies in living rooms, young men and women baptized in private pools. Each story reminded me that the miracle that saved me from the flames was not just for me, it was for countless others who would need courage to survive and faith to thrive. Miracles continued to mark my life, even outside Saudi Arabia. There were at least 5 documented attempts on my life by those who wanted to silence my testimony. A sniper's rifle jammed at the exact moment it was aimed, a car bomb failed to detonate despite being expertly constructed, and other attacks dissolved in ways impossible to explain. Each event reinforced the truth I had discovered in the hidden library so many years ago: Jesus Christ is alive, powerful, and present in the lives of those who trust Him completely. Despite the extraordinary work, personal life flourished quietly alongside ministry. I met Michael, a man whose faith was steadfast and whose heart resonated with my story. He knew every detail of my past before proposing, and his encouragement strengthened me for the mission God had called me to. Together, we raised 2 children, Grace and David, teaching them daily about the love and power of Christ. Even in the safety of our home, my heart remained connected to those still risking everything to worship secretly in Saudi Arabia. 7 years after the flames that were meant to end my life, my story had become a beacon of hope. Former guards who had witnessed my miraculous rescue converted to Christianity and fled, and a young cousin, once a child watching from afar, began reading a smuggled Bible and discovering faith. Each story, each converted soul, was a testament to the enduring power of God to transform fear into courage, persecution into purpose, and death into life. Through speaking engagements across the globe, I reminded others of the cost of discipleship, the reality of spiritual warfare, and the boundless power of Jesus Christ to intervene in the impossible. Every sermon, every testimony, every letter shared reinforced a single truth: the God who saved me from the fire is the same God who can save anyone from their impossible circumstances. Even in the safety of Jordan, danger was never far behind. Every day, I carried the weight of my past and the knowledge that my former life in Saudi Arabia had not forgiven me. Intelligence networks monitored those who fled, and even the smallest misstep could have ended my life. Yet, amid these threats, faith became both shield and compass. Jesus' hand, which had pulled me from the flames, now guided every decision, every step, and every encounter. Communication with believers in Saudi Arabia was meticulous. Each message, each parcel of Bibles and literature, was routed through secure channels, often taking weeks to reach their destinations. I knew the stakes. Those who received our materials risked imprisonment, torture, or death. And yet, the courage I saw in these secret believers was humbling. Women leading clandestine Bible studies, men baptizing siblings in private pools, families worshipping in basements and rooftops. They reminded me that faith does not retreat in the face of persecution. Several close calls proved just how fragile life could be. One evening, a delivery of materials intended for an underground church was intercepted by authorities. Though the couriers escaped, the risk was undeniable. Another time, while speaking at a regional conference in Lebanon, a car bomb designed to silence our message failed to detonate. The investigations confirmed the device had been expertly armed, yet it did not explode. Each incident reinforced the truth I had learned in the flames: God's power defies human logic and authority. Even as the threat of death loomed, I never allowed fear to dictate ministry. Every time I shared my story, I reminded listeners that discipleship is costly. Some Christians in the West recoil at minor inconveniences or social pressures, yet I spoke of believers for whom the cost is real, the danger immediate, and the stakes eternal. Courage, I emphasized, is not the absence of fear, it is obedience despite fear. Amid these trials, our underground network grew. By 2025, over 3,000 Saudi Christians were meeting in secret house churches. I maintained contact through encrypted communication, careful to encourage, equip, and pray for these hidden communities. Each success, each soul reached, was a testament to the power of prayer, faith, and God's miraculous intervention. On a personal level, the ongoing danger reinforced reliance on prayer and intimacy with Jesus. Each morning, I dedicated hours to Bible study and intercession, knowing that spiritual strength would sustain me where physical measures could not. Every prayer was for the lives of those still trapped in secrecy, for the courage to continue sharing, and for the protection of the global network God had entrusted to me. Through danger, persecution, and the constant threat of death, faith remained unshakable. The same God who pulled me from the fire had proven that no human authority could thwart his purpose. And in that assurance, I found courage not just to survive, but to lead, protect, and inspire thousands who walked the same treacherous path of faith. 7 years had passed since the flames that were meant to end my life. Those moments of terror, pain, and betrayal now seemed like a distant past, though their lessons were permanently etched into my soul. The woman who once lived as a princess trapped in gilded chains had become Sumaya, a servant of God, a mother, and a witness to his miracles. My life no longer revolved around royal titles or social prestige, it revolved around purpose, faith, and the mission Jesus had placed before me. Family, in the human sense, remained a complex and painful reality. My father had declared me dead, my mother passed away still believing I was a demon, and my brother had assumed control of our family legacy. I grieved for what I had lost, mourning the absence of relationships I had once cherished. Yet through this grief, God gave me a new family. Believers from across the Middle East, refugees who had faced persecution, and those who had themselves experienced miracles became my brothers and sisters. Their love was authentic, unconditional, and rooted in faith, a reflection of the family I now served in Christ. Marriage to Michael brought joy and stability. His steadfast faith, understanding heart, and unwavering support became a foundation for our ministry and household. Our children, Grace and David, grew up immersed in stories of God's power, courage, and love. Grace, at just 4 years old, prayed nightly for her grandparents in Saudi Arabia, believing in the God who had delivered me. Watching her faith bloom reminded me daily that miracles are not confined to the extraordinary moments. They permeate daily life when God is trusted fully. Our ministry expanded globally. Speaking engagements in Europe, America, and across the Middle East allowed me to share both my personal testimony and the stories of underground believers risking everything for faith. Every lecture, sermon, and conversation emphasized a simple truth: true discipleship costs everything, yet it is met with eternal reward. Thousands of letters poured in, each one a testimony to hope, salvation, and courage inspired by the miraculous rescue I had experienced. Yet, even with a global mission, the heartbeat of our work remained the underground church in Saudi Arabia. Through encrypted communications, smuggled Bibles, and careful mentoring, we nurtured over 3,000 secret believers. Their courage, resilience, and faith inspired me daily. Each life transformed, each soul encouraged, each believer strengthened became part of the living legacy that had emerged from the fire that once threatened to consume me. As I reflect on the journey, I recognize that the flames were never just about death, they were about destiny. Every trial, betrayal, and moment of fear was a step toward a greater purpose. Today, I walk with the assurance that the same Jesus who pulled me from the fire is still reaching into impossible situations. He transforms suffering into testimony, fear into courage, and loss into a lasting legacy. I am Sumaya, once a princess of Saudi Arabia, now a daughter of the King of Kings. Jesus Christ is Lord, and my life, ministry, and family exist to honor Him, inspire courage, and testify that no fire, literal or figurative, can overcome the power of God's love.